freezing wind and the sound of surf far below. A solitary figure leans forward and the tiny vehicle obeys, humming like a caged insect. That image is part of the Segway story, and it begins with a moment of stark promise and sudden consequence. People were told a modern transport revolution had arrived. Yet within a decade, the same machine was a punchline, a tourist prop, and in some headlines, a tragic instrument. This chapter sets the scene, the instant when the world first met Dean Teenan's two-wheeled idea and expected everything to change. We will move from spectacle to reality. This is not just a story about a clever gadget. It is about vision, hubris, stubborn design, and the way culture can embrace or reject new forms of movement. Listen for the tension between invention and adoption. The Segway is a case study where breakthrough engineering collided with everyday life. By the end of this video, you will ask, was the Segway a failure of technology, marketing, or of expectation itself? The answer lives in the people, the choices, and the small details that followed the initial reveal. Before the Segway, there was Dean Kamen, an engineer obsessed with giving people new ways to move. In the 1980s and 1990s, he founded DECA Research and developed medical devices, most famously the iBot mobility chair. The iBot could climb stairs and raise a rider to eye level, and it earned regulatory approvals in AD 1999. That success taught Kamen two lessons. Mobility could transform daily life, and clever electromechanical systems could do things people assumed impossible. His team began experimenting with dynamic stabilization, essentially teaching a vehicle to balance itself the way a human keeps balance on a bicycle. The work looked like science fiction on a lab bench. Gyroscopes, electric motors, and closed-loop electronic control became the language of the project. Kamen imagined a device that would replace short car trips, reshape urban design, and shift the economics of personal transport. He recruited engineers, aced demo choreography, and built an almost mythic narrative around the invention. This chapter focuses on the human core of the story, the inventor's temperament, his prior wins, and the conviction that engineering could remake a habit as old as walking. It explains why such a practical-seeming device carried such grand ambitions. The Segway was unveiled to the public in AD 2001, with an atmosphere close to religious fervor. The company staged demonstrations that looked effortless, and observers saw a future of quiet, efficient personal transport. Headlines used words like revolution and transformative. Part of the excitement came from carefully curated demos and a compelling promise, a vehicle that could balance on two wheels and be driven by shifting your weight. Yet for all the spectacle, important practical questions remained unanswered. How would cities regulate them? Where would people store them? And who would pay about $5,000 for one? The reveal also carried a rhetorical punch. The inventor's rhetoric elevated the machine to cultural icon, comparing the change to major prior disruptions. That language created high expectations and a binary outcome. The Segway would either remake cities or become an expensive curiosity. This chapter walks through the launch events, the media mania, and the early orders that looked promising but masked deeper challenges. It sets the stage for a clash between heroic engineering and everyday logistics. At first glance, the Segway looked like a magic trick. In reality, it was elegant engineering, combining sensors, motors, and real-time control software. Imagine two skateboards fused together and connected to a computer that never blinks. Gyroscopes detect tilt, accelerometers measure motion, and the controller commands the motors to move the wheels to keep the platform upright. The effect feels intuitive because the control system mirrors human balance. Unlike a car, which resists tiny shifts, the Segway continuously corrects for posture, giving a sensation of riding an extension of the body. That simplicity for the user hid great technical complexity for the designers. Batteries, thermal management, and reliable sensors had to survive daily abuse and varied climates. The machine was robust on flat, shared urban spaces, but the world is full of curbs, crowded sidewalks, and irregular pavement. This chapter breaks down the tech in plain terms and uses an analogy that stays with you. The Segway is less a vehicle and more a standing robot that follows your intent. Understanding that distinction is key to seeing why it excelled in some niches but struggled in ordinary streets. The Segway collided with practical friction. First, the price tag was steep for most consumers, about $5,000 for the base model. Second, urban regulations were unclear. Cities and towns debated whether these devices belonged on sidewalks, bike lanes, or roads. Many municipal codes were written long before such machines existed and defaulted to banning them or requiring special permits. Third, the device required a cultural shift. Most people were comfortable with cars, bikes, or simply walking short distances. For many potential buyers, the Segway felt like a solution to a problem they did not know they had. Sales were strong in specific sectors: guided tours, security patrols, and certain corporate campuses. But the broad consumer market never materialized at the scale the company had imagined. Marketing leaned on futurism and aspirational narratives, which drew attention but not necessarily widespread purchases. This chapter examines how rules, social habits, and the expense of adoption combined to blunt what hype had promised. It is a study in how real-world constraints can defeat even the most persuasive visions. No story of high tech is purely technical. The Segway experienced a series of moments that reshaped public perception. There were safety questions after a few high-profile falls and at least one tragic accident that received significant media attention. In AD 2009, a British entrepreneur bought the company, seeking to rescue its commercial promise. Within a year, he died in an accident while riding a transporter near his home, an event that the press linked to irony and misfortune. These episodes fed a growing narrative: the product was fragile to reputation shocks. On the corporate side, distribution and dealer support never scaled smoothly. The company struggled to translate engineering credibility into mass retail infrastructure. Meanwhile, competitors and copycats produced cheaper alternatives and small electric scooters that often solved first-mile problems more cheaply. This chapter avoids melodrama but tracks the real human and managerial errors, decisions about pricing, channel strategy, and how to respond when headlines turn sour. It shows how fragile market confidence can be when technology misaligns with everyday expectations. By AD 2015, the original Segway company changed hands. A Beijing-based startup called Ninebot, which had been competing in the small electric personal vehicle space, acquired Segway Inc. The deal reunited the brand and the technology with a different commercial mindset: scale, cost efficiency, and mass-market small-form scooters. Ninebot already produced low-cost personal electric devices and saw greater global demand for compact, foldable scooters that solved first-mile transport. Under new ownership, the classic two-wheeled transporter became a niche product while the brand diversified into shared scooters and micromobility fleets. In AD 2020, the company announced it would end production of the original personal transporter, marking a symbolic close to the first chapter of the Segway story. The technology continued, but the market logic had shifted. This chapter traces the transition from boutique engineering icon to a component in a broader, scooter-led micromobility industry. It explains why lower-cost, simpler devices ultimately found wider adoption than the original Segway did. So what did the Segway truly leave behind? It was not a simple failure. The machine proved that compact, computer-controlled balancing vehicles were technically feasible and useful in specific contexts. But its broader legacy is less about the product and more about lessons for innovators. First, transformative engineering must meet social and regulatory realities. Second, pricing and distribution matter as much as invention. Third, the market sometimes chooses designs that are cheaper, more portable, and easier to store. The Segway story also reframes how we define success in tech. Did the project fail because it did not hit mass adoption? Or did it succeed because it accelerated thinking about personal electric transport and inspired an industry of small shared vehicles? Both answers are true. The final lesson is philosophical. Technology does not exist in a vacuum. It needs cultural permission, a viable price point, and infrastructure to flourish. Dean Kamen's audacity altered the contours of possibility, even if the classic transporter never became the worldwide standard he imagined. That is the real mix of miracle and miscalculation we should remember. I hope this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the strategies and the relentless mindset behind these global icons. If you enjoy deconstructing business empires and tech legends in this Tech Archive style, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. That way, you will never miss a new blueprint of history. For those of you ready to explore more boardroom coups and technological breakthroughs, I have handpicked 2 videos for you right here on the screen. Click one to keep watching. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.